all the speakers with us, including the keynote speakers and the discussants. And we expect more people to join, but as the discussions, we have two speakers and we hope to have detailed discussions also. The session is designed to be from 2 to 4, but we can perhaps go beyond 4 also, given the importance of the topic. And that brings me to the very formal beginning of the second social protection conference of Social Protection Resource Center. Most of my friends, colleagues who are here today know me. This is Safdar Suhail. I'm the Executive Director, Social Protection Resource Center, which we established with a lot of colleagues in 2019 annual social protection conference from the last year. In September, we held our first social protection conference on social protection systems in Pakistan in collaboration with the International Islamic University. And this is our second conference, and we have shared the programs that we are beginning with this inaugural online session today. So, folks, thank you very much. And I should pay special thanks to the speakers who have taken out time to be with us. Now, before I introduce the panelists of today, a few words about Social Protection Resource Center. The context in which it was established was COVID, where when government wanted to close the economy, and there were serious concerns that we cannot shut down the economy perhaps more than 1 or 2 weeks. So the stark choices that you have to suffer due to disease or suffer due to the closure of economy, that was a startling revelation that our social protection systems have been so thin and ineffective. So it was in this context that we established our think tank, which now has been working on all the key issues of social protection in grounded social theory. We work on social policy at the theoretical level also, but we do take building block approach also. We work separately. We have a focus on disability, on elderly also, but generally the life cycle approach also we take. And theoretically, we have said it repeatedly, and we say it on our website also, that we stand for right-based social protections and for universalization of social protection for those universes which deserve it, like severe cases of disability, etc. So I'll take this opportunity to invite all the colleagues to visit our website to know more about SPRC, Social Protection Resource Center. In our vision of social policy, we include the competition policy and practices of as a social policy issue, as primarily believe that the social policy provides the objectives to the economic policy. So that's how we task force on governance. And there again, we have presented the same, that these are basically the socioeconomic objective of any planning process, which need to be defined clearly in the beginning. So in this context, with Pakistan in the midst of this very severe economic and financial crisis, this crisis is not new. We had it in 2008, 2013, 2018. Now this is an acceleration, and the the severity of and apparently the crisis is lingering on. So is this the right time to stop and revisit our social policy? We think yes. And then there are developments taking place elsewhere. I'll just name three major changes which are happening in the intellectual realm. One is that of debates on degrowth and productivism and post-productivism, which is there. Post-productivism, even in Global South, is also gaining traction, and a lot of literature is coming up. The second major phenomena or mega trend that we can watch is the homeland economics, so-called more, one would say, popular or seriously debated and policies being made in US, where homeland economics would like to have more production coming back to the American context, and they are using the industrial policy tools also for that. And third is the ecological justice. Again, wants the countries to reduce the consumption practices which are bad for the of social is in some cases in Global South also. At the same time, when we started with the income transfer programs, the relevant government department, that's Benazir Income Support Program, or the ministry which later on was created, that is the Ministry of Poverty Alleviation and Social Security, or the donors who have been supporting both the initiatives, mainly World Bank and ADB, have not been able to add or bring anything of substance to the table in addition to the income transfers. And there we all know that the Achilles heel of Pakistan's social protection system is to extend the protection to the economy in Global South. These debates are still at an early stage. My own response, or the response of Social Protection Resource Center, is that the reason that our designers of our social protection have not been able to put anything fresh on the table is because North. So I discussed the issue with my friend Pepe, who is working at present with the United Nations. But I'll speak about his career, that how we can understand the recent attempts of interlinking social with economic policy making, productivist and some called post-productivist paradigm, that I'm sure would be an issue of debate, because a focused debate on this paradigm may help us understand better the debates on alternate development models and their impact on social protection policies and practices, and the challenge of taking the social protection to informal economy, which is already an active issue now. But when the new paradigms would be there in their full force, what would be the situation? That also we would like to have. So this is the context in which we have designed today's session. And here we have two keynote speakers. We would start with Mr. Fortunato, and would have the question answer immediately after the first session, because Pepe has to go somewhere. But then we have our colleague Laura, Dr. Laura Alfers, who would talk about her own experiences and challenges of taking social protection to informal economy, particularly in Global South. I requested her to focus on Global South also. So looking forward to a very active discussion on these issues. For us, this is the beginning of this debate in Pakistan, which hopefully we would build on. And realizing or establishing Pakistan Association of Economic Sociology, because when we talk about interlinking or relinking social with economic, the discipline in which we think that we need to do more work is economic sociology, which is rather weak in Pakistan. We hardly teach economic sociology at the grad level or the levels regional committee to Pakistan Association for economic, that provisional committee attending our session today. Also, is there Shirin. So we would keep all the colleagues posted on the work that we envisage to do under the banner of Pakistan Association of Economic Sociology. I'll begin with a brief introduction of the speakers for today. We have Mr. Fortunato with us, who works as an economist at the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development. And before Fortunato works at the UN Conference on Trade and Development, where he leads projects on industrial policy, global value chains, and economic integration. He has worked in the offices of the UN, both in New York and in Geneva, and for several universities and research institutes, for example, University of Bologna, Université de Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne, and Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. He has published widely in leading academic journals as the Economic Journal, the Journal of Economic Growth, and the Journal of Population Economics, and contributes regularly to several newspapers and media outlets. He collaborated with governments of several countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and is an active part of the dialogue on global governance in various international fora, particularly OECD, WTO, etc. Thank you very much, Pepe, for being with us. We have Dr. Asad Zaman Sahib as a discussant for Pepe's talk, and Dr. Asad Zaman Sahib is the former Vice Chancellor, Pakistan Institute of Trade, and former Vice Chancellor, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, Islamabad, PIDE, a well-known old institution. And Dr. Asad Zaman completed his PhD in economics at Stanford University over a 3-year period from 74 to 77, concurrently earning a master's in statistics. The PhD training at that time led him toward a materialistic outlook, placing emphasis on valuing careers and professionals over social relations, an awareness that only became apparent much later, according to him. Subsequently, in this light, he pursued a postdoctoral year at the Center of Operations Research and Econometrics, located at the Université Catholique de Louvain in Louvain-la-Neuve, Belgium, from 77 to 78. During his tenure at UPenn, an invitation to serve as visiting professor at the California Institute of Technology came his way. Later, Hafiz Pasha extended an offer for the position of National Visiting Professor at the Applied Economics Research Center in Karachi, where he spent an additional year. Following a 6-year tenure at UPenn from 78 to 84, he received an offer, courtesy Dreamus from Columbia University, resulting in his promotion to Associate Professor. He subsequently moved to Bilknet, where he taught at the economics department from 93 to 99. In 99, he relocated to Lahore University of Management Sciences. After approximately 3 years at LUMS, he accepted an offer to head the International Institute of Islamic Economics from the International Islamic University in 2002, providing him with the opportunity to contemplate a fight. Now, the second, thank you very much, Dr. Sab, for being with us. And the second discussion that we have with us for Pepe's talk is Mr. Abid Khan, who is in charge of the Department of Business and Economics, Punjab University, Lahore. Mr. Abid Khan holds an MPhil in Economics from the New School, USA, and is currently working on his PhD dissertation. He was granted this prestigious Fulbright scholarship for graduate education in USA. He has conducted research and taught at various prestigious institutions, including research fellow at the Helbert Member Research and Human Development Report Office, lecturer at the University of Southern Maine, USA, teaching fellow at the Lang College, USA again, adjunct lecturer at CUNY, John Jay College for Criminal Justice, visiting lecturer at LUMS, among others. His research primarily focuses on matters related to economic growth and distribution, consumption inequality, and entrepreneurial ecosystems. He is also serving as a student advisor of the department. Thank you very much, Abid, for being with us. And before I invite Pepe, let me also introduce the other speakers. We are honored to have Dr. Alfers with us, Dr. Laura Alfers, who is Director, Social Protection Program of Women in Informal Employment, Globalization and Organizing, WIEGO. Laura has been associated with WIEGO since 2009, initially contributing to the occupational health and safety for informal workers, projects in Ghana, Tanzania, Brazil, Peru, and India. Over the years, she transitioned to various roles within the social protection program, including directing it since 2017, with background in development studies, PhD from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and an MPhil from Cambridge University. Laura has focused on social policy. She engages in grassroots action research projects, notably in South Africa and Ghana, resulting in journal article reports and policy briefs. As the current director, Laura's work has evolved to a global scale, collaborating with informal economy networks, informal worker networks. She actively supports institutes, initiatives like HomeNet South, East Asia's Universal Health Coverage Advocacy, and partners with the International Domestic Workers Federation on social protection in Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. Based in South Africa, Laura has served as research associate at Rhodes University, Department of Sociology, supervising postgraduate students and contributing to the labor studies program through the Nile Target Labor Studies Unit. Additionally, she co-edited the Handbook of Social Policy and Development in 2009, published by Alger. Thank you very much, Laura, for being with us. Now, we have as a discussant, Muhammad Kashif Saeed. He is Director of Policy and Strategy, Punjab Social Protection Authority, Government of Punjab, Lahore. Kashif is an economist, having 15 years experience of working with the academia, public sector, and NGOs in Pakistan in the field of social protection, monitoring and action of economic development, public finance. Kashif joined PSPA in July 2016. At PSPA, that is Punjab Social Protection Authority, he is responsible for leading the policy, research, and monitoring and evaluation related activities, including analysis of social protection issues and challenges, drafting policies and research reports, monitoring and evaluation of social protection efforts, and suggestions of policy options to guide program design and social protection reform. He has done his MPhil in economics from Punjab University, where his thesis was on the impact of social cash transfers in Pakistan. Kashif, thank you. Development Pathways, UK. Shirin has worked on delivery of reform, policy reform, and payment solutions in social protection in different countries and regions. Currently, she is leading the Social Protection Unit at the Government of Kiribati, supported by our DFAT project. She has over 10 years of experience in program management, financial management and governance, and environmental education and gender. Thank you very much, Shirin, for being with us. Pepe, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Safdar, and it's really a pleasure to participate to this conference for the first time, being part of this very important and timely dialogue, given what's going on in Pakistan, as you were mentioning before, but it's more general to say that the state of the things in other developing countries, in the global south, and even in the global north. I think a dialogue on how to revive and to revamp social protection is extremely important. And I'm also extremely pleased to enrich and strengthen even more the cooperation between the Social Policy Research Center and UNCTAD, which have been developing in the last few years over several processes. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here with you today. So let me start my presentation. I will take 10-15 minutes, and I will discuss, in a sense, what is going on in this productive or post-productive paradigm, as mentioned by Safdar. Social policy, social protection policy, and traditional economic policy, which is, if you want my perspective, being an economist, a political economist by formation. So let me start my presentation by stressing that development policy has been long divided between two main components, which we can define two different types of approaches. One of these approaches targets people directly and seeks to alleviate the poverty of individual households. It's the idea of traditional income support policy, health and education intervention, and access to credit or other financial, which focuses instead on economic opportunity with the idea of raising overall productivity through, for example, economic-wide macroeconomic policies, trade policies, or legal or regulatory reform. We can call the first kind of policy social policy, social as economic or growth policy. Now, this standard separation is, in my books, an important mistake. In fact, we should overcome the traditional split between economic and social policy and to recognize the two agendas in one. Why this is the case? Because sustained growth requires eliminating new technology and opportunity to wide segments of the labor force, rather than confining their use to an elite. This means has been traditionally one of the objective of social policy more than economic policy. And analogously, and on the other hand, better employment prospects reduce inequality and economic insecurity more effectively than fiscal redistribution alone. That is, economic growth can be an important vehicle to do social policy, to reduce inequality and to fight poverty. And indeed, industrialization has been historically extremely important in reducing poverty. It is true that the benefit of industrialization often take time to trickle down population. And for example, during the first Britain industrial the century, they basically, before the rise of the labor union and institutional changes that took place, these benefits did not trickle down on them. But more recent, the things changed in a sense. And for example, the recent experience with rapid and export-oriented industrialization in the East Asian tigers first and later in China has somehow compressed this process of trickle-down benefits from economic growth to social improvement and social process, and produce a poverty reduction miracles alongside growth miracles at the same time. Over the last three decades, for example, over 800 million, that is to say that over the 70% of the world's poverty reduction since the turn of the millennium took place in China. It took place in China thanks to industrialization in China and miracle growth experience in China. The social policy on the one hand and social progress has an important impact on economic progress, and on the other hand, and economic policy agenda. Now, things are on the verge of a change in the recent times. There are, in fact, clear signs that we are now entering a new era in which industrialization will no longer be as potent in spreading the benefit of economic-wide productivity gains. And in fact, the global trends in innovation have significantly reduced the potential of manufacturing industry to absorb low-skilled workers. And I'm thinking here in particular to robotization and automation of the lines of production. And the labor share, and consequently, the labor share in value added has fallen rapidly, particularly for low-skilled workers. For creating jobs because their business model is still based on importing inputs and the lack of integrated manufacturing industry in developing countries increasingly operate as enclaves, in a similar vein that high capital intensive and export oriented industry traditionally do. You can think to oil industry, for example. Therefore, these global value chains might spur export and higher income only for a narrow sector of the economy, bypassing most of the workers, and in particular bypassing those workers which are most vulnerable, which are somehow the objective of any social protective intended kind of approach. Now, this growth model falls short not only on equity or poverty reduction ground, it also fails somehow to produce growth, because higher productivity activities, as I was mentioning before, cannot encompass an increasing share of the economy. Just as research-rich economy rarely grow for long periods of time, outside traditionally short periods of time which characterize terms of trade boom, the global value chains based industrialization is no longer capable of generating rapid and sustained economic growth. So what should be today, and what should like today a successful development model, given that the one which had been running and which somehow characterized East Asian Tigers growth model and Chinese growth model seems to be no more working? Well, as always, investment in human capital, I mean investment in education, investment in infrastructure, better institution, generally speaking, remain indispensable elements to achieve long-run economic progress. These are the fundamentals of economic convergence. But a development strategy worth its name must above all enhance the productivity of the existing workforce, not only the workforce that might emerge in the future thanks to such investment. We've got to go beyond the education and human capital led strategies. Developing countries retain significant potential to increase agricultural productivity, for example, and to diversify from traditional agriculture to cash or to export crops. But even with a more productive agriculture, and somehow as a result of a more productive agriculture, it is likely that young workers will continue to leave the countryside and flock into the urban area. As productivity increases in the agricultural sector, less and less workers will be needed in that sector, and so we will be experiencing the well-known process of urbanization. They will be employed not in factories in most of the cases, as the story of the last 10 years can tell us a lot in many of the big cities of the global south, but in informal micro enterprises characterized by low productivity levels. Generation development policy will have to target these services and find a way to increase their productivity, to increase the living condition of big part of the population. The reality is that few informal firms will grow to become national champions, but by offering a range of public services, help with technology, business plans, regulation, training for specific skills, government can unlock the potential of the more entrepreneurial among them. Today, we are in the middle of a transition away from what has been defined as a neoliberal paradigm, market fundamentalism, which characterized the world since the early 80s, since the presidency of Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK, followed by what became known as the Washington Consensus. But what will replace it is highly uncertain at the moment. The absence of a solidified new paradigm is not necessarily bad, however. We certainly do not need yet another orthodoxy offering ready-made blueprints for countries and regions with different circumstances and needs, as it has been the case with the Washington Consensus and what it was defined later on the Washington Consensus Plus, a short list of things to do, applicable more or less to all the countries of the world. But economic and social policy must be guided by an animating vision. And the new consensus may be emerging in the last years or even months around the notion of productivist, which has been recently framed in a series of articles by the Turkish economist Danny Roderick, which emphasize the primacy of disseminating productive economic opportunity throughout all the regions and all the segments of the labor force. With respect to the neoliberal paradigm, productivism gives government and civil society a more significant role in achieving these goals, put less faith in the market, and become more suspicious of large corporation and market concentration, which characterize global economy in the current juncture. Productivism or productivist paradigm also emphasizes production investment over finance, so the primacy of production over finance, and the importance of revitalizing local community over globalization as targeting lower productivity segments, enhance the livelihoods of the urban poor and boost productivity in labor-absorbing sectors of the economy. One important implication, and I will conclude on this note, is that social policy and economic policy will increasingly overlap. The best social policy, economic security, is to create more productive, better jobs for workers at the bottoms of the skill distribution, the poorest among them. Policy must focus on firms as much as on households. And the new global and technological context implies that economic growth is now possible only by raising productivity in smaller, informal firms that employ the bulk of the poor and lower middle income classes. So it really seems that at last, economic and social policy may fight agenda in terms of framing, developing progress on the other. Thank you very much, Safdar. And I would be happy to listen taking question or comments on my notes.
Well, thank you very much for raising extremely important issues like the role of industrial policy in a development paradigm. And the key message that you have given is that apparently the shelf life of the neoliberal model is finished, if one can use the word, but we don't have alternative, and there are many alternatives. Danny Roderick is presenting us with one. I recently saw his suggestion for UK also, and asked you what does he or you exactly mean by across regions and across sectors. But this is my pleasure now to invite Dr. Asad Zaman comment on Mr. Fortunato's thoughts and presentation. And
thank you very much, Safdar, and I was very happy to listen to Professor Fortunato, and I was in general agreement with nearly everything he said. I will give an example of productivism. I think that's the word. In my own work a little bit later, in terms of striving for prosperity, and I use this word instead of growth because growth is really a terrible word. It has been co-opted and abused. So I think that there is massive opportunities. There's no problems. I mean, the supposed economic problem. So this Washington consensus policies, they just have nothing to do with the problems of Pakistan, but because they have and are not the solution. First of all, there are massive opportunities, but why aren't we utilizing these opportunities? I think the main obstacles are political. There to be social progress. Very specifically, BISP, the main department which handles social protection, they give for a large number of reasons. So the other is to just work around this, just work around these obstacles. The masses are, there are billions of people, and so it's easily possible to work around. And productivism, as theorized by Professor Fortunato, is actually a very simple and common sense solution. So instead of discussing this, let me illustrate. I've recently joined Akhuat University, which is a university by Akhuat Foundation, which is working, which provides microfinance to the poor on the basis of Qarz-e Hasana. The head of this organization is Dr. Amjad Saqib, who has recently joined as head of BISP, this same organization. The government has appointed him, and he is also facing, I mean, he is the primary man who knows about graduation poverty, but he's facing a lot of political resistance in terms of implementing schemes which would lead to self-sufficiency. So anyway, this university has the goal of providing education to all the poor. So I have recently written up a vision for how we'll do this. And I intend to make it very different from all other universities in Pakistan, in the sense that what we will do, since we are going to get poor people from rural areas, we will teach them skills to enable them to make a living from the land. So instead of, as opposed to this, nearly all universities in Pakistan, when you get out with a bachelor's, you become dependent on capitalism because they wealth. So instead of creating people who will actually help increase production in Pakistan, you create cripples who are dependent on the market, and the vast majority of them can't actually find jobs, and so they become a drag on the economy. So we have a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of things we can teach them, which will allow them to make a living from the land. And them how to build their own community. We'll teach them to be drivers of social change, to be social reformers. And we will ask them to engage with their own communities, build their local communities, create local self over the phone using, and we are bypassing the government, because the government is an obstacle, not a friend. So we will also change the social context of education, because capitalist education teaches people to seek their own personal fame and fortune, and without absolutely without actually creating any without their worrying about the community. So our top universities like LUMS and Al-Khan, their graduates just go off to the USA to make their own personal fortunes. So I think that should be enough as comments from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaman, and I have been following your lectures and talks, and this is good. You feel that there is not much in terms of criticizing or continuing to criticize. People know that this model is not working, and you have switched over more to the practice of giving education with social context. We would get back to you for more on these experiments.
To have stopped working today, but I do have some slides, and so I will start sharing my screen. Can people see these okay?
Yeah, we can see that. You can put, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. So I'm going to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes on extending social protection to informal economy workers, which is quite a critical issue. Over 60% of workers globally are in the informal economy. In South Asia, we know the regional estimate from the ILO sits at about 88% of employment. So it's the region second only to sub-Saharan Africa in terms of levels of informality. And what I'll do with this presentation is just give some background on informality and social protection. And then look at some examples of the extension of social protection to informal workers from countries of the global south. And then conclude with a few remarks about some critical issues that I think we need to think about and consider. So obviously we know that social assistance often targets either those outside of the labor market, children and older people, or people who are very poor. And we know that social insurance tends to target, those informal employment, cover those in informal employment. And that leaves a large number of people within the labor market, who may not be classified as poor, but who are still often struggling to make ends meet, and are very vulnerable to poverty, as we saw during COVID, when lockdowns happened. Many of these people who didn't have social protection, this missing middle, fell into poverty as a result of there being no social protection. And much of this missing middle is made up of workers in the informal economy. I think what's important to point out here, though, is that it's a large group of people, this missing middle. You have everyone from lower middle income right down to low income, but not poor. And that diversity is quite important to keep in mind when we're thinking about the design of social protection systems. So before going into social protection, just to take a moment to give some background about a few characteristics of the informal economy, which I think are important if we're thinking about optimal design of social protection schemes. The first is the heterogeneity of the informal economy. So again, as we saw with the missing middle, this is not just one group of people. This is actually quite a diverse range of people with different incomes and so on. The same is true for the informal workers in the informal economy. This is not just one group of people who are completely homogenous. Actually, the informal economy is quite heterogeneous. And in terms of access to social protection, I would say that two of the biggest differences are between those who are self-employed workers in the informal economy and those who are waged employed workers in the informal economy. And you can, for example, be a waged employed informal worker working for a formal sector firm, or you could be a waged worker working for an informal sector firm, an unregistered firm. Or you could be a self-employed own account operator, so a self-employed informal worker who doesn't employ others. And we call that status and employment. And there are many different statuses of employment, and this pyramid kind of tries to illustrate some of the different statuses in employment that exist, all the way from employers down to unpaid family workers. And yeah, particularly when designing social protection systems, what we have to think about is this difference between a waged worker, where there is an employer or a potential employer who is identifiable, and those who are genuinely self-employed workers, and who there is no counterpart for. And then the second is gender segmentation. So what is interesting about this triangle, which is a WIEGO triangle, is what we've done is categorize the different statuses and different types of employment that you find in the informal economy. And you'll see on the left-hand side that the lower down the pyramid you go, the higher the risk of poverty. Okay, so employers are less likely to be poor than unpaid family workers. So there's a range of incomes happening. But we also see gender segmentation. So women tend to be concentrated in the types of work that have a higher risk of poverty. Home workers, casual workers, unpaid family workers. In the middle of the pyramid, where the self-employed own account operators are, we see a mix of men and women. And at the top of the pyramid, where we see the employers, those are mainly men. So those are two important things to keep in mind when we're talking about the informal economy. So considering this background, I thought I would just provide a quick summary of what I think some of the key considerations are when designing social protection to cover workers in the informal economy. And I've divided these into law and policy and design, and this is not comprehensive, but just to give a snapshot of some of the key issues. In terms of law and policy, what we need to do quite often, social protection systems, and especially work-related social protection, which tends to be built around social insurance systems, often excludes the self-employed workers. We can see that both legally, so oftentimes there will be countries where the law actually excludes access to self-employed workers, and that takes out a large chunk of informal workers. Or there's a de facto exclusion, so they might be included in law, but the conditions of access to the scheme are so difficult for the self-employed that access is not possible. And one of the big ones we see there is that self-employed workers have to contribute both a share have to contribute themselves, both the employer and the workers' share to a social security scheme. And that's often just creates a financial exclusion, creates an affordability exclusion. I think in terms of financing, we also want to see schemes that allow for multiple sources of financing with social solidarity as a key principle. So having multiple sources of financing coming into a social security scheme helps to keep the scheme viable and financially sustainable. And it may also allow for cross-subsidization between sort of better off workers and those who are poorer. So some of the most successful schemes that we see have incorporated workers in the informal economy into a mainstream social security scheme, which allows for some of this cross-subsidization to happen. Some of the schemes that really struggle are schemes that have been designed specifically for workers in the informal economy, and where informal economy workers are basically subsidizing themselves. And that often means that you have poor people trying to subsidize their own social protection. It undermines redistribution and undermines the kind of financial viability of the schemes as well. And then I saw there was a comment in the chat around needing to include communities. One of the big issues that we face is that, particularly around work-related social protection, so not necessarily talking about the cash grants here, that around the social insurance schemes, the governance structures will tend to include representatives of government, employers, and formal workers, but there often is no space for the representative of informal workers in the governance of schemes, and that takes away a key element of participation and ownership, which can undermine the success of these schemes when trying to reach informal workers. And then I think in terms of design, some of the key things we need to think about is this ability to account for the heterogeneity in statuses in employment and contributory capacities. We need schemes that can take account of people who might be waged workers one day and self-employed workers another day, or are, self-employed and waged workers, but we need them both to be able to access the same scheme. And it also needs to take into account that there's a huge range of incomes in the informal economy. Some informal workers may be able to contribute. Some informal workers may never be able to contribute to a scheme. They all need some kind of protection, and so schemes need to design for that heterogeneity. We also need to be, and this is something which often gets left off, the specific life cycle risks that are faced by women workers. Maternity benefits for women working in the informal economy are very rare to find. So when doing those extensions to informal workers, thinking about making sure that maternity benefits and linkages to care services are included is important. Reducing administrative barriers to access. Just the time away from work is money for informal workers, and so ensuring that access to social protection schemes does not take an inordinate amount of time and administration is important. Digitalization of schemes is often sort of raised here as a really important way in which administrative barriers can be reduced. I think we also need to recognize that digitalization can create its own barriers to access, depending on levels of digital access and digital literacy. And we also need to think about benefits which are adequate for working people. And I think this is one of the differences, with the question of adequacy comes up a lot in the social assistance discussions. But I think we also need to be thinking about, working people tend to have responsibilities that people who are outside of the labor market may not have. And so benefit adequacy is really important here. And we saw that in South Africa during the COVID lockdowns, where the benefit that people could get through the unemployment insurance scheme was 10 times the level of the benefit that came through the social assistance system. And yet many workers could not get access, because in South Africa, no self-employed people can access the unemployment insurance system according to the law. So those are just some key considerations. And the fact is that there are some countries like my own that are very behind in reforming their social protection systems to incorporate a wider sort of definition of working life. But there are several countries around the world which are making really good progress. So I thought I would just look through a couple of interesting schemes here. Uruguay's Monotributo and Monotributo Social are two interesting schemes. A monotributo translates to monotax. And essentially what the government has done here is created a single tax and social security payment. So in one go, self-employed workers, I think they are allowed to have up to 2 employees for the monotax. The social monotax is for below poverty line self-employed workers who do not have any other employees, so for own account workers. They can register to pay a tax and a social security payment in one easy simplified payment. The contributions are based on a percentage of presumptive monthly incomes, and it's very simplified. You sort of fall into one of 3 categories. It's a relatively low monthly cost payment, and it is partly subsidized by the government. The social monotax registrants who fall under the poverty line, there's a minimum payment that everybody has to conform to, but the social monotax registrants can gradually increase payments up to that minimum payment over a period of 4 years. Of course, the assumption here is that their economic prospects improve over those 4 years, so that they can, gradually build up to paying paying that contribution successfully. And that isn't something that always holds up, right? Because, you know, the economic policy and the economic conditions aren't always such that people's businesses improve over time. And the benefits include pension, sickness, occupational accident, maternity, paternity, and the newborn care subsidy, which I think is really important. And actually, the majority of the registrants in the system are women. I think almost 60%. And you can see that you know, part of that is that the benefits are actually really important to them. Another interesting scheme is Zambia's national pension scheme. And I won't go into huge amounts of detail here, but there were two things that I found interesting about this scheme. It actually was a pilot program running for several years. And the key thing about this is that they kept a central social security fund, but there were different rules for different groups in the informal economy. So it really allowed for that heterogeneity of the informal economy to be realized in the design of the scheme. So domestic workers, for example, could join the scheme, and there would be space for a co-contribution from their employers. And then the benefits they got out of that were similar to what the minimums that other waged workers got access to. There was conditions for the urban self-employed, a simplified payment schedule, lower contribution rates than the domestic workers, and benefits suited to their needs. Many of these were like urban informal traders. And then there was a third subgroup of agricultural self-employed. Again, a simplified payment schedule, but it included benefits that were specific to small farmers as well, including things like crop insurance, weather-indexed benefits, and so on. And so that was a really interesting experiment in one fund, but with different windows coming into the fund and different types of benefits depending on which groups of informal workers were being targeted. The other thing about the NAPSA scheme that was interesting is that it used what they call the technical working group to design the scheme. And informal workers were well represented on that technical working group in terms of being able to say what it is they prioritized in terms of the benefits that they wanted to get out of the scheme. Some other examples closer to home from South Asia. India's workers' welfare boards are always a very interesting experiment in reaching the informal workforce. What is interesting here again is that they take a sectoral approach to extending protection. So different sectors depend, and it's sectoral. So I think one of the most famous examples from India is the Construction Workers Welfare Board. It caters to all workers in the construction sector. It doesn't matter whether you have an employment relationship or not. And again, they use quite sectoral level innovative mechanisms to try and derive financing from those who profit from the work of informal workers, but who are not necessarily their employers. So there's a 1% cess levied on the construction industry as a whole that goes into the Construction Workers Welfare Fund. And together with the contributions from the workers and the government, that creates the financing for the benefits. Again, also very interesting in that they decentralized, close to the ground, and are governed by tripartite bodies, which allow for voice and participation of workers in the informal economy. And there's a very interesting development happening in the state of Rajasthan at the moment, where civil society has been pushing for a gig workers welfare board. So those informal workers working for platforms, digital platforms like Uber, and other drivers platforms and so on. The idea is that those platforms such as Uber will need to pay a 1% tax as well, which will go into the gig workers welfare fund, along with contributions from the workers to finance social protection. And then looking around for good examples from South Asia, I came across a really recent example from Nepal. In August 2023, they extended their National Social Security Fund, previously only open to formal sector workers. It's now open to both informal workers and the self-employed, integrating them into an existing scheme across a wide range of benefits. Interestingly here, workers will contribute 11% of what is considered a basic monthly salary, and almost 10% will be contributed by the local government towards their towards their benefits. And then there's a different category of self-employed professional, and that includes doctors and consultants and so on, who will contribute 30% of income to the fund, so much higher for that group of professionals. But again, very interesting to see this differentiation happening. So those are some interesting examples to think about. And then I just wanted to end with a few important issues that I think are critical sort of background information, talking more about the theoretical side of things. One is this idea that social insurance is dead. And you'll have seen that what the examples that I'm giving here are not just social assistance, and they're not just social insurance. Quite often they're a combination of both, right? And that's really what we need to see if we're going to see coverage across the informal economy, just because of the range of incomes and types of people in this group. You can't keep a hard definition a hard dividing line between social insurance and social assistance. You need the worker benefits from the social insurance schemes, but you are going to need some kind of financing and support from the state or from those who profit from the work of informal workers to ensure that there is real access, because some of those workers are not going to be able to afford to pay 30% of their incomes into the scheme. There is an idea, and it's been heavily promoted by the World Bank in their white paper on social protection, which came out in 2019, that social insurance is dead. And that, it was relevant in a world where formal employment kind of existed and was predominant. But if we think about countries where informal employment is the norm and self-employment is very high, forms of social protection which are attached to payroll taxes are irrelevant, increasingly irrelevant. And their answer, instead of a social insurance scheme, the answer is that we need these voluntary private savings accounts. And often what these rely on are only the contributions of informal workers. So it will only be informal workers contributing to a private fund invested in the stock market, and that's what they're going to have to rely on for their social protection. So we looking at the empirical evidence for this, though, I would say, and we ran a study with the International Labour Organization, which showed that actually social insurance continues to make up almost 20% of global social protection financing, and that has remained stable over the 21st century. So the idea that social insurance is dead is a theoretical idea put forward by powerful actors, but is not necessarily borne out in the existing data. The problem with saying social insurance is dead is that it takes away a potentially very important source of financing for workers in the informal economy, which is the contributions of formal sector employers. And that might be very small in countries like Pakistan, but it also takes away the possibility of doing things like the workers' welfare boards in India, of saying, well, then we need to place taxes or cesses on industries in a way that allows us to provide social protection. So we need to be very careful about this issue of whether social insurance is actually dead. It's a large political debate. And very much tied to the is social insurance dead discussion is the does social insurance incentivize informality? So whether or not social insurance is dead, and again, this comes out from, say, World Bank policy papers, is that actually we need to get rid of social insurance completely because it distorts the labor market. It incentivizes informality and unemployment because it places an additional tax on formal employment. And so, people will want to escape that, and what we see is the growth of informal employment. So again, we've run some studies with the ILO and also reviewing some of the Mexican data, which was used to uphold empirical data, which was used to uphold these kinds of arguments, and showed again that the data and evidence just doesn't exist to back up these claims. And that actually, there's I think looking at reforms of social insurance across several countries, there's actually no correlation between informality and what's going on in the social protection system. That's not to say the design of social protection systems is not important to the labor market, but it's to say that quite often the impact of social protection on the shape of the labor market is overstated in some of these debates. And that quite often when there is an impact, it's a very limited impact, very much at the margins on the labor market. And that other factors, aside from social policy, are important to consider in terms of what is actually driving the shape of employment and the shape of the labor market in a country. That we may need to look beyond just the social protection system and look at the wider economic trends that are happening. So those are just two issues I wanted to bring up as food for thought, and I will leave it here. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Laura. Thank you very much for sharing the insights from other countries. Dr. Alia is also among the participants, and her and me, we were part of the 4-member core group for creating institutional arrangements for the informal economy workers 3.5 years ago, but unfortunately not much progress was made, and it's very encouraging to see many other countries making progress. We come back to this subject after getting comments from Abid. Hopefully his system works now. Abid, please go ahead.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, so again, sorry to everybody. I don't know what happened. I honestly don't know. So referring back to the talk by Dr. Fortunato, I think the problem lies in the very core design of the system that we call capitalism, the market economy. And if I may, if you take you back to all the way to Adam Smith, remember in the era of the Industrial Revolution, he talked about division of labor and specialization as the core reasons why economy grows. But that also comes hand in hand with individualism. And so this market structure, this way of defining economy and therefore allocating resources requires a transition in what we can call social virtues. There's a rise of individualism, which is a requirement behind this method of social arrangement, and which requires then for individuals to break away from their commune or communal form of social protection. Moving forward, what Marx identify as alienation is again, I would say in terms of social protection, taking us in the same direction. That is, it's natural for the system and for people in the system to get alienated from each other, to get alienated from the product of their labor, and therefore there's a systematic design here that is going to break down the communal structure and move towards a market-based resource allocation. Now, once we understand that method of allocation, then social protection also has to come from the market. And that form of social protection then requires firms to provide that service that people could buy. What Dr. Laura just referred to is informal structures, which are not mandated per se from a strict market perspective. And therefore, in a situation like this, you need ultimately a market solution, which is what we call insurance. But then these insurance programs come with very heavy externalities, which in most cases are not, you cannot first define them, and it's even hard to capture or to assign value to them. So either you go towards what Dr. Ross, famously known as the Ross theorem, where he says you have to identify everything as private property, and then of course market will be able to deliver. But that is, as we all know, not possible. So then what does this leave us in terms of social protection? We either go back to some form of communal systems where these, by the way, still exist especially in the global south, where community acts as your basic safety net, education, or coming together in cases of extreme events like deaths or marriages and whatnot. Sorry, I'm calling marriage an extreme event, but it's an extreme financial constraint. Or we move towards a market-based structure. This is the theme that the market structure is going to propose or ultimately deliver. Last year or so is a novel idea. I would say it's closer to Keynes. In terms of social protection from a development economics perspective, I think we have to one of the two. Either we move towards understanding that this market-based system is not going to deliver on social protection, and therefore the social protection needs to be taken out of the realm of market-based service structure, and therefore the government takes on this responsibility by creating, again, the kind of structures that Dr. Laura was presenting just before this. Or we understand that this is something that the market, that this has to be delivered through the market, and therefore we create institutions, or we come up with solutions for social protection that the market actually can deliver. For instance, paying somehow for the loss of externalities, which ultimately leads to a loss of revenue for the firm. I think one mistake that we commonly make is that we look at China and in some extent cases India in terms of the great examples of how poverty alleviation projects were successful. But we forget that especially China is not a typical market economy. It's a move towards more of a Trotskyian idea of Marx, rather than a move towards the kind of market economies that we see in the global north. And therefore, we overly emphasize the success stories of poverty alleviation and other social protection benefits that happen in China without understanding that it's running a completely different market system. So again, if I may wrap this up, I feel that for the kind of social protection that we are looking at, we definitely need to move past the neoliberal era. We need to understand the neoliberal solutions were cookie-cutter problems. That's not going to work. We need organic solutions which are homegrown, which most likely are going to be different for different kinds of economies based on where they are in terms of the level of GDP they are at, the level of education that they are at, the level of development indicators that they have been able to achieve, and the trajectories towards these statistics. And definitely move past what is traditionally known as, again, the cookie cutter model, where we are given a straight jacket kind of a solution. We believe that's going to deliver. It's not going to deliver. And again, I feel that capitalism as a market structure and therefore as a way of allocating resources is not going anywhere. So we need to understand that, and that discussion need to be brought right in the center of this debate. And so one solution that I would propose is that we need a close marriage between sociology and economics, right? Where we understand economists at the moment, especially the traditional economics, focuses on the standard representative agent, which is rational, well-behaved, the kind of agents that none of us are really. We need to understand how sociologists understand the human society. And then we can bring in the great advances that economics has done in terms of allocating resource allocation and understanding of the various processes. And I think our marriage will then give us a system. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Abid and Mr. Fortunato. As particularly Abid has raised direct questions on your hypotheses and suggestions, you have used the rather mild word of term of interlinking social with economic, retaining the basic Washington consensus model, calling it Washington consensus plus, which Abid thinks is not possible. So before we get some questions on your presentation, I would give you a chance to respond to Abid in particular.
Sure. Thank you very much, Safdar. No, just to clarify that, of course, I'm not defending the Washington Consensus Plus. I was just in analyzing the history of the, if you want, history of thought or the ideas that were diffused. We have had a Washington Consensus first that was replaced from the Washington Consensus Plus, but both of them, I do think that did no good, but from economic perspective and a social perspective. So just to clarify this, I completely agree. So after having clarified these important points, let me come back to the comments about discussion, because my perspective and my take on the issue was, of course, being an economist, and while I do think that Asad complement these, looking at the political component, and Abid, so to speak, on the comment of Ahmad, I completely agree. There is an important political economy issue here. We could agree in principle of what to do, but of course you have vested interest, and once this vested interest come into action, this can make it impossible to achieve policies which in the traditional classical economic literature could be defined as optimal policy. But anyway, desirable policy cannot be achieved not because I don't know what these policies are, but because simply I do not want to implement those policies because of the vested interest in the society. This is, of course, at play in advanced economy, and is probably even more at play in developing countries because the level of inequality is higher. And if the level of inequality is higher, the de facto political power of economic elites tend to be higher. And therefore, we tend to fall down in Luigi Zingari as a power to gives to the elite, which has that power, having more capture on economic regulation and policy making. And of course, if economic regulation and policy making are skewed and biased by this interest, for these economic elite, it will be even more easier to get more advantage and more market power on the economic markets, and therefore this will reinforce the cycle. And this is a cycle which is well clearly operating in advanced economy, and I do think that is even more operating in developing countries because the level of inequality in economic terms and therefore in de facto political power, it's even higher. I also do appreciate, and let me congratulate with Zaman, the idea of what I could define is a rural transformation from the bottom up as a way to escape this kind of cycles and this kind of traps. I think it's an excellent idea, and I would be curious to see more and to know more about how these programs will be developed in the future. Coming to the comments of Abid, which are equally thought-provoking, and again, I think I completely agree on that. It's like, of course, along with the market revolution, and in particular along with the neoliberal revolution and the idea of market fundamentalism, which was emerging in the 80s, as I was briefly mentioning in my intervention, you had on the cultural side a diffusion of the idea of individualism. And it's true, another thing, that what increasing into individualism and the change of moral perspective do is that, and it is especially true in certain societies, is that somehow when the market is not delivering, especially on social protection mechanism, a society in which there is a culture which is not an individualist culture, but is more a common and cooperative culture, can somehow step in and being a substitute. Since the market is not delivering, and since in many cases even the state is not delivering, because the state in a neoliberal framework is outsourcing to the market many of that kind of solution. So it can be the family, it can be the society, it can be the tribe, it can be the community to step in and solve and try to solve that problem and work as de facto insurance mechanism for those who are falling behind or are losing out on the markets. But of course, if along with a market revolution, which makes social protection provided by the state less efficient, we have also a cultural revolution, which makes the substitute mechanism, which was implicit in the society, less efficient, we do have a problem. And that's the problem that rightly so Abid was stressing and emphasizing. Now, once we have this problem, of course, what we need to do, in a sense, even here, using the economic terminology, the first best solution is try to act on those, exactly in those situations where the things are going wrong. And of course, on the one end, we can think too, as Abid was suggesting, market cannot operate fruitfully, so we need state institution who are gonna institution operate in an incentive schemes which is different to the one they have been operating so far. So that's of course one of the solutions from an institutional point of view. I do think that another solution it's very important. Of course, we're speaking about culture here. We need to work in that direction. I think going beyond individual inspiring is important, not only at the national level, but at the global level, in a moment in which we are, of course, facing a lot of problems in providing the global public goods that we need. And therefore, coming back to, again, sociology, the socialization hypothesis that Samuel Bowles and Gintis put in for a few years ago, I think is extremely important. It is we need to work towards education to change the mindset on the people and allow solutions which can go beyond and outside the market solution that we have in mind. But once again, I gotta say I enjoyed a lot of the set of comments, and I do think that if we want to face the problem that we're facing right now and the challenges that we're facing right now in a productive way, just to get back to productiveness, but we need to keep together the economic dimension, which is the one I was trying to sketch during my presentation, along with the political dimension, which Professor Zaman was mentioning, and along with the social and cultural dimension, which, in my opinion, was at the heart of the intervention of Professor Abid Khan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pepe. I'll encourage the participants to post their questions in the chat. But very quickly, you see, bringing culture to the social protection debates, that's what was one of our aims while designing this conference. We talk about the triangle of state and society and market, but we seldom focus on society in cultural terms also. Abid, would you like to say something very quickly on Pepe's response to your observations?
Yes. So thank you for that response. And I think, as he has very rightly pointed out, these things, of course, get gelled together. I think we need to start thinking of the distributional aspect rather than just a growth aspect. I think that's one thing that's missing. And second, the aspects of social protection should no longer be the result of economic growth, but in fact, they should be the precursor or prerequisite of economic growth. As he at the very end pointed out, you now need in the psyche that we live in, where individualism is already there, the virtue has been established, and it's growing everywhere. Probably going back to communal system might be harder than educated people and providing them with the required level of education, healthcare, and some other basic requirements so that they can become successful towards what he called productivism. You need these basic social protection tenets, again, education and healthcare especially, to provide people with the opportunity to become productive members of the society that we want to envision in the future. So I think the social protection programs now need to be further opened up, and some of them need to become kind of like a fundamental right, which should be considered a precursor or prerequisite to growth, not as an outcome of the growth models.
Thank you, Abid. You see,
may I just add one quick thing, Safdar?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I just Yeah, thanks. No, because I completely agree with Abid, and that's why while this is disseminating new technology and productive opportunities to wide sectors of the labor force, rather than confining them to a narrow elite, which basically means decreasing inequality. Decreasing inequality is a critical component of a proper development agenda. So once again, I completely agree with my discussion.
Thank you, Pepe. But I have a provocative repost to Abid. You see, are you not trying to bring in charity in the name of culture? But I think Shirin would have a strong reservation on that, because we obviously stand for right-based protection. So how do you connect culture with right-based social protection? Abid would get back to you, but let's hear Shirin first with her comment in general, but particularly on
somehow work the camera right now. So I hope everyone can hear me. And first of all, congratulations again, SPRC, for again getting us all together and talking about this issue, which has many opinions, obviously, around the globe, but also in Pakistan. And then also thank you, Dr. Alfers, for that presentation. And I think I'll just there's very interesting, obviously, discussion coming from the previous session as well. But for the moment, I'd just like to start with what Dr. Alfers, you sort of closed your presentation at, which I think currently is a very important point, which is about social insurance. And I'd like to sort of take that to how we are suddenly we see social protection over the past few decades just being attached to poverty alleviation. And when we sort of, because when we leave social insurance and when we sort of talk about social insurance is no longer valid, what we're doing is that we sort of at a risk of leaving behind the risk management element of social protection, which is very, very important. And specifically, I mean, you mentioned life cycle risks, which is absolutely like I, as a social protection practitioner, would take that as the mainstay. But also going forward, when we're talking about climate change and social protection and the kind of challenges that we are facing, management element and concentrating completely on the poverty alleviation element may not serve the purpose that we want social protection to serve going forward. And specifically, I would even go as far as to say poverty alleviation would always remain a byproduct almost of when you manage for life cycle risks, you will obviously be protecting people from poverty, and that in itself is what social protection needs to do. And if by forsaking social insurance, you are missing the mainstay of most economies, then of course that's something. So thank you for raising that point, and thank you also for sort of going towards that. And again, more and more we see from some of the discussion which is grounded within poverty reduction side of the social protection benefits, the integration of a lot of other instruments like savings, which you also mentioned, and sort of going away from the risk pooling and all. So I think that for me was a very important point that you made, and that's something that we need to sort of take forward in this debate, and in a way that sort of brings us back to the, I mean, it's what we all, when as practitioners, keep going back to, which is that at the end of the day, social protection is most most tied to the social contract. So when we talk about political economy, when we talk about all of these things, what Dr. Sadozai also said right now, I mean, you can't call it rights-based, you cannot be talking about the missing middle, you can't be talking about any of this if you don't go back to the social contract. And that is between the state and the citizen, that is between state and society. And having said that, just sort of, link that back to, again, Dr. Alfers, because, such a comprehensive talk. So linking that back to what you said about heterogeneity of workers in the informal economy and heterogeneity of informal economy itself. So whereas the examples you gave, and India and Pakistan and even Latin America, Africa, they have a very different kind of informal economy, and agree with Abid, who, in terms of contextual solutions, because right now I'm speaking to you from the Pacific, and a very, very small Pacific island, which is Kiribati. Now, when we talk about, we are talking basically about subsistence fishing, which will never probably be a candidate for social insurance, not in the short to medium term anyway. But we are looking at resilience and risk as one of the, but a different kind of risk, as a very, very important consideration when designing our policy in Kiribati for social protection for the future. So right now in Kiribati, there is actually an unemployment benefit, which almost works like a universal basic income, because that's how in the structure of the informal economy does not give you that space for social insurance. But that doesn't mean that, that's why I began with risk pooling and risk management and all of that, and agreeing with that social insurance would always remain and should always remain an important part of it. But again, the heterogeneity element is also important. In terms of one more point, and sorry, just on that, because we went into a bit of the previous one and a bit of this. So just, similarly, when we talk about social contract here in Kiribati, or even some other Pacific countries, and when we talk about state-society market, actually there is no market. I mean, you can't think of the state-society market relationship the way some of the, most of the literature on state-society market, or some of the experience on state-society market would be, would have you think about it, because it's mostly state-community relationship here. So these are all, like you already have said, heterogeneity is an important element, context is important. Finally, you talked about, just another point, there were quite a few, but I picked up 3 things from your presentation to just sort of comment on a little bit more, which is adequacy. And again, adequacy becomes important, and you also use the same example in the aftermath of a crisis or a disaster. And when we're going into a climate risk and preparation kind of thinking into, when we're taking that into social protection, it becomes very, very important. So for example, if I give the example with taking nothing away from all the people who designed it, who worked on it, but the Asad cash transfer during COVID in Pakistan. Now, Asad was giving money to people with an income of up to, because they had to, because like we know, it was the people in the informal economy, it was the workers in the informal economy who were very hard hit by COVID. And they lost their jobs, and so the limit was kind of elevated up to people who were earning up to 30,000 Pak rupees, which is roughly for that time $200 per month. And what was the and the benefit under that SAS grant was quite low. It was it was around $3,000, 3,000 rupees, which is really a fraction of that. So in terms of adequacy, we weren't even giving them what they were losing in income. So there is that specifically when you have not, as an informal economy worker, when you have not had any ex-ante liquidity, and then you're hit by a disaster, and then you're given through, because financing is important and because things are the way they are, practically you know what comes to you is not quite adequate for the need there. I think the contrasting example or a comparative example perhaps is what's coming out quite a bit in terms of the UBI I dare say experiment, which is happening in Kenya, which are the results that are coming out from Kenya. And the UBI has actually managed COVID for people receiving UBI. COVID was much better manageable. And whereas I've been talking about social insurance and all of that, I think one very interesting finding that actually JPAL research brought in, and if I'm not wrong, led by none other than Banerjee himself, was that, so they were, as most of you know, that the UBI in Kenya has 3 different ways of payment. And so you can either have lump sum, or you can have continuous. So there were different results for different people, but the most interesting was perhaps that the people who got it per month had the best mental health outcomes. Now that's another thing, another issue that going in the future becomes important for us. So I think all of these things coming together for Pakistan, learning from the examples that you have given. Of course, we had the EOBI, which could have gone for, which would have been a very good platform, and perhaps is still a very good platform for still going with good social insurance schemes, which can be expanded to informal sector workers as well. But unfortunately, with the whole decentralization debate not being settled, we had an institutional mess which actually, in my opinion, took away from a very innovative idea, which was the employee old age benefit insurance in Pakistan. But I think it's still for us, from Pakistan and working on social protection, and so this is something to still look at and see if what we can salvage out of it. But the way I look at the landscape, and this is where I'll end this, the way I look at the landscape currently, we have of course, the Benazir income support program. I personally how does it affect life cycle risk or not? I will have a different opinion on that. But given what it is basically a poverty targeted program, and given that it is a PMT based targeting, of course it is counting assets and not consumption, which basically means that younger people will be still serviced, but older people will not be serviced. And I think looking at globally the issue of aging, and looking at the fact that we still have something and recognizing that it's a poverty program and not a risk, which I've already said, not necessarily a risk management program, but what we don't have is something for the older people, which I think for Pakistan it is important to consider. And we have been with SPRC as well and different platforms, we have been sort of looking at the option of a social pension, because it doesn't have to, because yes, we have to go into a social insurance model, we have to look at different models, but the fact that you recognize everybody who has contributing to the economy, whether in the formal sector, whether in the informal sector, whether as women who are working within the household and often doing a double duty, because we know that these very small micro enterprises that women do in across Pakistan often go unrecognized. But I think it's something to start thinking about in terms of what kind of a benefit mix do we want for Pakistan. Pakistan right now has the BISP. Sure, it has its own problems. It can be another platform. There can be another point of discussion for that one. But what Pakistan misses out because of the PMT model is that and as aging becomes a global problem, as aging becomes even more of an Asian and South Asian problem, I think these are some of the things that is one of the things that we must sort of start thinking about in our mix. So for me, thank you again, Dr. Sadozai, and thank you, Dr. Alfers, for putting up some of these things. But for me, taking away the risk management, the life cycle risk element, and the general risk management, the ability to have ex ante liquidation if a disaster hits, these are very important right now, as well as we go into a future of a very climate challenged future. Yeah, some of these things, when we talk in the context of informal economy, become more real than when we only look at it from a poverty alleviation link. Sorry, Dr. Safdar, I couldn't talk too long if I'd gone into that as well. But
that is okay. Thank
ever
you
so much for the.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Like always, you brought.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, that is fine. Please go ahead.
So I have some direct observations on the Dr. Alfers' presentation. So she has given a good, concise presentation on the social protection for informal workers, highlighting the heterogeneity and gender segmentation and citing examples from the Global South. I was personally intrigued by the example from India, where innovative mechanisms were cited, which have used to obtain financing from those who profit from the work of informal workers, but who are not employers themselves. So we will definitely need to see how these could be customized in our case. In Pakistan, most of the work-related social protection is offered to formal sector workers who only constitute Alfers has shared is very important. So she also highlighted the need to cover the just now Dr. Shirin was which can't ensure any transformative change, can't bring people out of poverty. So in this situation, covering the missing middle could be difficult. So we would have to adopt a mechanism of differential contributions, where maybe we are paying, the state is paying for the contribution of for any unemployment insurance or such kind of contributory schemes. But still, I think in the short run, governments, I think, let's say political buy-in would be quite difficult to include the missing middle at this stage, but that's a medium term agenda, I think, nonetheless. So here I would also like to share how social protection for informal sector workers has been evolving in Pakistan. Shirin said that when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, there was soon a realization that the shutdowns were mostly affecting informal sector employees. So as a response, the Benazir Income Support Program, and then applied some administrative wealth filters on that data. For example, if someone is working in the formal sector or used as proxy for the well-being status, for example, an entry into foreign travel records or motor vehicle records, etc. So, but even in that phase, the most of the emphasis was provision of SARS emergency cash to general population, because most of our informal sector workers are belong to the bottom quintile of population, which even otherwise is part of the BISP kafalat or their unconditional cash transfer programs. So when you are just giving an unconditional cash transfer programs without any regard to work, even then you are mostly benefiting the informal sector workers. So there is a high correlation between poverty and informal sector workers in Pakistan. So, but that said, because there was a realization, and even before the COVID, over the time, because since 2010 and since the launch of Benazir Income Support Program in 2008, there has been a realization that informal sector workers are one of the vulnerable groups for which are often outside the scope of social protection. So there is a need to undertake regulatory measures as well as launch social protection schemes to cover these groups. So recently in Punjab, we have enacted Punjab Domestic Workers Act in 2019, and then Punjab Home-Based Workers Act in 2023, where we have defined the rights of these workers and their entitlements. But as we know, poor implementation often renders these regulations ineffective. But I think we should be optimistic that there is some progress towards inclusion of informal sector workers in Pakistan. So the SARS strategy, which was a very ambitious program for social protection of PTI government, that also highlighted the need of having a database of our informal sector workers in Pakistan. So this is one of the biggest constraints or challenge facing Pakistan, even in Punjab, when we plan to roll out any scheme for the informal workers. The first question is that how you define informal workers and who are the informal, like what is their identification mechanisms. So one way of doing that was the creation of these databases through online mechanisms. So the Labor Department in Punjab has this Punjab Job Center, which is an online portal where employees, current employees, prospective employees, as well employers can register themselves. So similarly, there is Punjab Employee Social Security Institution, PESI, and these employee social security institutions are all across Pakistan. So in Punjab, the PESI has made another Android app, domestic workers registration app, where registered workers, where informal sector workers can register themselves, and this registration would then make them entitled to basic health facilities and medical treatment in the social security hospitals. So PESI also offers online business registration, online payment of social security contributions, etc. But given the literacy level of Pakistan, so even the penetration of mobiles and smartphones is increasing, but I feel that still we need in-person mechanisms and that could work at the community level, for example, registration desks at the union council level. So, but this is one of the biggest challenges, that we don't have any database of informal workers. And then the second thing is that even if we have a definition, even if we have a pool of informal workers, however small it is, but suppose there is a pool of 50,000 and 1 lakh informal workers. So how to roll out social protection linked to work for them? So then there is a question of the designing of social protection programs. For example, even in Punjab and at the federal level as well, there have been efforts to roll out an unemployment insurance, so that whenever work is lost due to some pandemic or some floods or any other crisis, so unemployment benefits could be given to the registered workers. So when we were trying to design this program in Punjab, we were not sure how to, like, what would be the willingness to pay for the contributions, how would we be recording the status of work, whether if one is claiming that he is unemployed, how to verify that, and then how to design the benefits these questions largely remain unresolved. So, but this is also on our plate, but we don't know when we will be able to launch an insurance product for the informal sector workers. But some other options, that some of which are in practice and some of which are we should be opting those options, is one is that linking cash transfers to skill development or job search training programs. So Dr. Asad spoke against the unconditional cash transfer programs. There are a lot of opponents in Pakistan of these unconditional cash transfer programs. So I partially agree with them. Because I also don't want people to be dependent on the state and have negative labor supply incentive. Conditional cash transfers for helping chronically poor or labor constrained families. So even in Pakistan, the largest unconditional cash transfer program under Benazir Income Support Program only gives benefit to the families where there is and the females are the recipients of these programs, and these poor females are often labor constrained. So there are efforts to economically include this is easier said to economically include them. However, there have been efforts at federal program, microfinance schemes by UNCTAD, by national rural support programs, or other microfinance institutions. There have been so many microfinance banks opened in Pakistan over the recent years. And there are asset transfers programs being run by federal government as well as Punjab government to make people graduate out of poverty sustainably. One of such programs have been evaluated by Banerjee and Deflo et al. And the research was published in Science. So this is a much cited publication which showed that asset transfers program are effective in making people move towards sustainable livelihoods. So again, most of the beneficiaries of such schemes are informal sector workers. So informal sector workers could benefit from such type of programs, from the unconditional cash transfers programs, So I think the best way in Pakistan's circumstances currently would be a hybrid approach where both of these options are available. I would also want to emphasize, and here is where Punjab Social Protection Authority or any social protection authority has limited role, but it has motion of formality. So on our department and industries department, maybe tax authorities, etc., can play a significant role by providing incentives or maybe using state coercion wherever needed to make people and businesses or register their employees. So in Pakistan, we have the case where even if you are registered, your business is declaring 50 people as formal employees, and then there are undeclared 50 people who are also working for you, but they are not part of any record. So here is an area where state regulation has to play an effective role. So that's all from me. So summing up, I would say that
bringing in the operational difficulties also, but at the same time, this is very assuring to see that Punjab Social Protection Authority is aware of the challenges and has in a way our conference at the end of the year provides ideas to all the colleagues for the research agenda for the coming year. And Abid, with one last key question which we have decided to give priority among many other questions, which is that can IMF, WTO, etc., World Bank play a role in coercing our elites in the can WTO play a role in forcing the question?
Just poverty alleviation, climate change being very important. I think I just wanted to point out, I mean, I'm not saying that social assistance is not important. It's critically important, and to many informal workers, particularly those workers at the lower end of the income scale. I think, though, I'm trying to sort of emphasize that we need to see social assistance and social assurance and assistance and social insurance as linked more than we do in the world of social protection and development. That they tend to get, sort of totally different areas of social protection, and they are in some ways. But if we're going to provide social protection systems that cater to the range of people in the informal economy, we do need to think in more integrated ways, and also to think about how we can use social insurance to increase the fiscal space that is available for social assistance. And on that point, I also just wanted to add, just listening to the example about Kiribati, which is a context I don't know, but sounds completely different from many of the ones I mentioned, where it's not state market community, it's just the state and the community. I think that's also where global redistribution is quite important, right? In that we start drawing on global instruments as well to ensure that the financing of social protection is adequate. It's not just left up to that tiny society on that tiny island. So things like the Global Fund for Social Protection, or using global climate financing agreements and to fund social protection. I think that element of global redistribution is really important in those cases. I also just wanted to pick up quickly on Kashif's point about formalization and social protection, and how social protection can work with other agencies to sort of work towards formality. And I think Uruguay's mono tax system is quite interesting in that respect, right? That they basically have increased formality, because once those self-employed firms or those own account workers register, they're registering for both a tax and a social security payment. And so they become registered firms, they become formal firms in that way. And what was very interesting, we just did a case study on that particular scheme, is that what's happened is there's also been a wider sort of movement towards valuing formality in that society. So, for example, street vendors wanting to get access to certain markets need to have the stamp of the monotax in order to get access to those markets. So real incentives are being built into the system, and social protection is very much part of that. And I hear you say that social protection can't do it alone, but I definitely think the monotax example is a good one of how tax authorities valuing the payment of that monotax has led to an increase in informality, and certainly something to think about. Thank you, and thank you for having me. And I do have to leave now. It was wonderful to hear these deliberations, and I'm sorry that I can't stay to listen to that really interesting last question. But thank you very much.
Yeah, Laura, thank you very much. Social Protection Resource Center and all the other participants and discussants, I sincerely thank you for sparing time and being with us. We will do obviously a comprehensive report on our conference and share with you, and hope to continue getting more guidance on the work in this part of the world. There are many questions, but very little time left. I would like to put in a few minutes time. The questions which have been posed is that can IMF, World Bank, WTO force our elites to ensure and implement such policies to protect vulnerable segments of the country? What do you say?
Sir, I think the simple answer is no. And a slightly more longish answer is that they have no reason to, and they don't believe in it. See, I think it's commonly misunderstood what their mandate is. IMF's mandate is short-term external balance support. So it's not their mandate to come in and transform your economy, let alone transform the society. And this is what the questioner is asking, whether they can force the elite to work differently. It's not their mandate. It's not something they're supposed to do. And given that the economic model that they follow, they don't even, World Bank, their job is, yes, more development focused. But again, it's not their job to meddle with the social structure of. And coming from the other side, why would, even if they want to force this onto the local elite in the global south, why would the global elite succumb to this? Like structure and institutions, whether that's legal or political or generally social, there is no reason for the domestic elite to come to such. Understand that the structure of the society that we live in, what we call capitalism now, success is more accumulation. And therefore, deep down, there was a survey done, I think, by Stiglitz and others about 10 years ago, where they said that deep down, even people who are right now at the bottom of income distribution somehow believe that they will be able to gain. And therefore, following Veblen, we have these bourgeois virtues that we somehow aspire to be. And therefore, those who have achieved or attained this status, no matter how, they have no reason to succumb to external pressures. So IMF, World Bank, and WTO don't have the mandate or the conviction to force this onto elite, and the elite actually do not have any reason to do those like Warren Buffett and Bill they want to contribute, and they have, created billionaire clubs where they said, let's give a 50% of our wealth, but very little membership of the. Thank you for this opportunity again, and thank you everybody for listening.
Abid, thank you very much. I think Pepe's answer could be, if I can foresee that, to an extent, yes. Out how, but before I come back to you, Pepe, I would expect you to wind up the whole discussion. I would like to give 1 minute each to Kashif, Shirin, and Dr. Asad Zaman to share their parting thoughts. Shirin, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Absolutely a delight to be here, and just to sort of, again, a lot of, Pakistan, I think there is a lot to be learned from other places, because we've become a little too steeped in poverty alleviation as the framework for social protection. So as Laura also said, while as a parting thing, it's like social insurance and cash transfers and all of these things. It's a benefit mix that we have to see what the landscape of social protection that we want for ourselves. And Abid, at some point, we'll have to have a session on how tax versus charity, in terms of, should we be taxing Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, or should global taxation mechanisms for that, or country level taxation mechanism, national taxation mechanism for that versus charity, because I think, again, we have to keep in view, and I may be more of a fundamentalist in this, and I accept that as a social protection practitioner, which is that we cannot look at this beyond, without keep going back to our social contract. And there was a question also in the chat about give them skills, not just social protection or cash transfers, or what was at one point also called a handout. I actually really do not think it's a handout. I really think we need to inform ourselves better about social protection if you want to, because when it's an entitlement, when it's part of a social contract, then it's neither a handout nor a dependence. It is an entitlement. And there is enough literature available to sort of look at how what the larger benefits in terms of horizontal trust, vertical trust, all of these things. We're talking about culture. I didn't catch that completely, so I don't want to go into a discussion that you've been doing, but all of these things are important for social cohesion. Social cohesion is important for taking cultures forward. You cannot have culture and social protection without that element of social cohesion. And social contracts in today's world, in any kind of society, have a very, very important element on that. So I think let's sort of take a minute to sort of always go back when we think that there is dependence, when we think that this is a handout. I think it's a little bit of us having to inform ourselves and looking at it through a larger framework, which has to be the social contract, which has to be what kind of state citizen relationship we want, not just because of state citizen, because of the impacts on the larger society, which are important, which is where all these debates will continue to be. So that will be it from me, but very, very willing to sort of, continue the discussions with SPRC in the future as well, and hopefully getting some of these visions into practices and realities as well, and coming out of this thing of, oh, social protection is for the poor, it's a poverty alleviation program. It's not. That's what the political economy does. Let's not just look at it. There are linkages, there is integration, of course, but it's not just that. Thank you so much.
We will, Shirin, inshallah, we will continue striving for that. Kashif, you have a minute. Are you with us, Kashif?
Yes, I am here. So I would like to thank you for inviting me to this session, and it has been a very good session. Nothing more from my side from the angle of inclusion of social protection, but generally there has been some debate on the role of social, like unconditional cash transfers, the charity or the state dependence aspect, and the role of community. I think these are very interesting debate, and in Pakistan, uh, I think these are very important aspects to cover in our upcoming policies and strategies. So just highlighting the role of community. So while there is an informal protection given by the community, the state is also formally including communities in their social protection intervention. So I just want to highlight our economic inclusion program at PSPA, where National Rural Support Program is our partner, and they have their village level committees and higher level committees as well. Those committees are involved in identification of the beneficiaries of in procurement of the assets, in transfer of the assets as well. So going forward, we are also thinking to move away from, or also include it as a component that we give community-based assets as well as the individual or family-based assets that we are giving right now. So this is very, I think, important to understand the role of communities, and also to strengthen these communities from the support of the state itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kashif. And we have many questions. We would continue with this dialogue with the social protection community. We had a large number of people, but time is always a constraint. So some colleagues have to left. So I invite at the end my friend Mr. Fortunato to conclude on my behalf the whole discussion. Go ahead, Pepe.
Thank you very much, Safdar, for the honor of leaving me the floor to conclude the discussion. First of all, I will just quickly answer to the question that from the floor were raised, and you relaunched to me. I gotta say that I agree with my discussant. In a sense, it is difficult to imagine the World Bank or the IMF using the conditionality that they have been used to force and somehow push developing countries to implement the Washington consensus type of economic policy, to use these conditionalities in order to force this country to implement policies which could circumvent the constraints that the elite puts to them in order to favor social progress and therefore to enact effective social protection policies. Indeed, there is vast evidence in political science literature that suggests that somehow the intervention of external international organizations like the World Bank and the IMF have been used to strengthen the power of local economic and political elites in developing countries, rather than making these elites more vulnerable vis-a-vis the mass population. In a sense, getting assistance from the World Bank and the IMF is a sort of substitute of getting more profits or resources from oil or from more national resources, and gives to the elite more means to maintain their power, their control of the society. And to move on a deeper level, I really do think that change, we cannot think to change coming from outside. That's a bit the whole story of exporting democratization at a certain point was diffused in the American way of looking at international political economics. The change, social change, economical change, political change, to be sustainable should come from within the society, from inside the society. Now, one thing that I think it is important and can play a role, and maybe this is a way of also closing our discussion, is to change a bit the political economic game in countries in which you have this constraint posed by local elites, which make it impossible to enact certain kind of policies. And the way of doing this was somehow suggested in the question, is changing a bit the political economic game from the country level to the regional level. if we change from the country level to the regional level, then we have different interaction taking place, and we could envisage a change of the equilibrium, which could lead to a better policy making. So just to have an answer which could be a bit more hopeful and close our discussion on a more positive note, what we can say is that we should look with more interest, and I would say with more proactive kind of attitude to regional agreement and regional integration, because these, among other advantages, can be a way of changing the internal political economic game, which is creating a lot of constraints to developing economies right now in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America to enact effective social protection policy, precisely because local elite tend to oppose to the social protection policies. And just to close our discussion, moving from a national perspective to a regional perspective can help us and can put into place a positive dynamic. But from an economic point of view, and there is a lot of work done in this direction. Part of the work that we do in UNCTAD, of course, is part of it's at the origin of our mandate, in a sense, is to strengthen economic cooperation integration among developing countries as an accelerator of economic development and accelerator of prosperity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, again, having regional blocs working more closely together, the political game can be changed within individual countries, and also giving more voice to these regional blocs in international fora, like the WTO, or, for example, the negotiation taking place on climate change. And third, last but not least, moving towards a regional perspective can also have long-lasting impact on the cultural expression and attitude of different communities. So again, we could, with this change of perspective from a national to a regional level, we could act to the three key leverages which we've been discussing during the discussion of today, which is the cultural dimension, the political dimension, and the economic dimension. That said, I'm very happy to participate to this meeting, and I thank you and the Social Resource Center, Social Protection Resource Center once again for having invited me to take part of this discussion. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Pepe, for concluding the debates, which is in some sense beginning of the debate and concluding on this key message that region is important. We have used in the introductory remarks of our conference Global South as a construct. This in itself is debatable whether what is Global South. We can talk about the region considering thinking South Asia, Far East, China, Middle East also. But I think this this message that one should go beyond the national level constraints, open up the debate, see what is happening in Global South, see what is happening in Asia, and revisit social policy and look at the larger debates which can inform social policy, let's say, in Pakistan. So at the macro level, we should have those debates and dialogues, and Social Protection Resource Center in 2024 would be spending adequate energies on this level. And then we have to learn from the practices, as Dr. Alfers presented some practices. We would go for collecting more examples of successful practices of social protection programs and initiatives from within Global South, so that the kind of problems that Kashif, representing Punjab Social Protection Authority, which is the social protection authority of the largest province of the country. And when we would combine both, hopefully we would be able to address, if not address, come up with some kind of suggestions to the problems that Shirin has identified. And while listening to Dr. Asad Zaman's talk, I remembered a handbook which has recently come out on the welfare models in different Muslim countries. Now, the culture is a part of the whole equation, so that also we would try that in our work with our partners in the coming year does justice to give equal importance to the to economic, social, and cultural, and then to come up with one such imagination, one would say, which is able to have a more balanced approach towards, let's say, overdrive of market and economic, the debates on post-productivism, and not let the culture be used to sanctify the charity. That is an important debate. But all these debates, if they are able to help us unpack the term social and the term public, I think that would create some openness in the debates on social protection in Pakistan, which have become very stale over the last 10 years. And it is suffocating to hear and talk about the same regurgitation of things using technology for social protection, consumption smoothing, poverty reduction, poverty graduation. I'm suggesting to our Pakistani participants directly that there is a dire need to revisit the social policy and to understand what is happening in the global South, and then involve the society more in coming up with better imaginations of our future, so that we do not continue with the slide of vulnerability which is happening in the country right now. So with this, though this is a somber note to finish, but the situation in Pakistan in terms of social exclusion and vulnerability is really dire. This debate hopefully has opened up some more space, brought some oxygen, some hope, some positivity in terms of coming up with more ideas, learning from other examples. So I thank all the participants on behalf of Social Protection Resource Center to participate in today's discussion. Again, thanks the keynote speakers and discussants for their very valuable time and suggestions. And we continue with this dialogue, and we hope that next year, come December 2024, when we would be holding our third social protection conference, we would have made advancement in terms of imagining a better social policy for Pakistan and for Global South in general. So I thank you all again and wish you a Happy New Year, which is a few days away, and Happy Christmas to you, Pepe. And we keep in touch. God bless you all. Thank you very much.